Today we have three DWI lawyers from the law firm of Gerald Miller answering the most commonly asked questions by their clients. A question that is often asked is, what is the difference between a DWI and DUI? This varies from state to state, and in Minnesota, there's a long history as to how a DWI came about and how a DUI came about. You've talked about it before, Kyle. What was your thought on that?
Well, everyone always wonders if the U versus the W, but it's really just driving while under the influence. If you're under the influence while intoxicated, basically it means the same thing. There's not really a difference, at least here in Minnesota. I know Wisconsin calls them OWIs, but what it really means is it's what is the designation for a DWI offense.
Right. Yeah, there's really no difference in Minnesota.
You know, I often hear people think too, where you have a DWI that's based on drugs and not on alcohol, it tends to lend itself more to driving under the influence. And so you hear that a lot too. But as you've said, for all practical purposes, as far as a client is concerned, there really is no difference.
Right. Now, most people, at least in the metro area, and I think for the greater Minnesota, most people are driving these days. It's a lot different than maybe when you started practicing, but now in DWI world, a driver's license is a big deal. And that's probably one of the main concerns. Some people would rather go to jail than lose their license. I mean, that's probably one of the biggest concerns we have with clients right now.
Right. Is am I going to lose my license if I get a DWI? And the answer is yes, you are going to lose your license, and you're going to lose it 7 days after you get the DWI. You'll have options to drive and options to challenge the revocation, but you are going to lose it.
I mean, ignition interlock only started in 2011 or so it's been a pretty recent era for that to be an option. You know, so a lot of people are even frustrated when that's their only option. But again, they didn't have a lot of options before that came about.
No, but the good news is, though, that now, today, almost everybody will get to drive because of ignition interlock.
Right.
I think back in days gone by when people were on restricted driver's license where they couldn't consume alcohol, that was a restriction on their driver's license, they had no chance of driving it after they violated that restriction. Often would be 3 years, a second violation 6 years, a third violation 9 years. A lot of that has just gone by the wayside, and ignition interlock allows people to drive. It may be inconvenient to some degree, but they get to drive, and they get to drive pretty much anywhere they want.
Right. And I think the other thing that goes with license that we aren't talking about yet is the whiskey plates. So obviously they call them special registration plates, but that's another aspect that when certain DWIs happen, depending on the level of offense, how many, what's the test result, whiskey plates are actually a huge concern too. If you're driving for work, you're a nurse that drives,
right,
half the time your company won't even let you have that job anymore if you have to have whiskey plates on your car.
Yeah.
So that's another big concern.
Yeah.
How long you lose that license, of course, it depends on your history, your DWI history, your license revocation history, and on a first-time DWI, if you're a misdemeanor, fourth degree DWI, and you have no aggravating factors or prior DWIs within the last 10 years and your test is under .16, you can get a work permit. That work permit is good for up to 60 hours a week driving time, and it doesn't give you as much freedom to drive as ignition interlock does, but it does give a lot of driving time.
Right.
And it's a heck of a lot cheaper than ignition interlock too.
Yeah, that's true. Certainly not having a license impacts everyone.
Right.
And it does makes it very difficult to go about your daily life. That's one of the things too that people will always ask is, but if I get a work permit, I have children, I have to take them to their sporting events, I have to lead my life. Unfortunately, with a work permit, you don't get to just do all of those things. That work permit is only good for driving to and from work and for all work-related purposes. Where ignition interlock, you can drive wherever you want as long as you abide by the rules of ignition interlock.
And I think it depends. When you meet with the Department of Public Safety to get the work permit going, you'll sit down with an actual human being, an evaluator that'll lay out what are your days, what are your times. And obviously I know every client is going to be different. Some, it works just fine. Life is 8 to 5. They go
Right.
back and forth. I mean, other people heck, our job. It'd be tough to fit 60 hours a week,
Right.
6 days a week into what we do, and we're going to different spots all the time. So obviously every client's going to have
Right.
a very unique take on what that question of license, what it's actually going to do for them.
Yeah.
And there's different evaluators that will give you different leeway too. So it not only depends on your normal situation with life, but it depends on the evaluator you get at the DMV, what they're going to let you do.
Yeah, that's very much true. I've had clients that tell me that they go to one evaluator and they're very strict, and they go to another one and they're not quite as strict. But that leads me to another thought on that too, is that the different types of DWI, the 4th degree, the 3rd degree, the 2nd degree, the felony DWI. There's also, you can get a DWI by virtue of a refusal of the test. In Minnesota, it's a crime to refuse to submit to testing. If you refuse to submit to testing, that's an automatic 1-year revocation. Now, again, if it's your first time and you fall into that first time category that I said before, you can get a work permit, and that work permit will allow you to drive for up to that 60 hours a week.
Right. Probably one of the next most common questions that we get from people right after they get a DWI is whether or not they're going to go to jail.
When I think on certain offenses, if you're a .16 or more, if it's a multiple offense, from day one, that answer is clear, because you stay in jail for maybe even up to 2-3 days if it's over a weekend, just because of what type of offense it is.
Right.
The Minnesota legislature hasn't been too lenient on that. Now, whether or not it's after the case it depends, obviously.
Right.
But going back to what you just said too, when you're arrested and that test comes out 1-6 or more, or even a refusal, or your prior history, how long you're going to stay in jail before you come up to court, a lot of it depends on what county you're in, what city you got arrested in, what the policies are, how quickly that jail wants to get you up, in, and out. And of course, that will lead you into the issue of bail as well,
Right.
Can you get that bail posted? They have rules. I mean, they have a 36-hour rule in Minnesota that says you have a right to be released, or strike that, you have a right to be charged within 36 hours. Probably a booking is the safest way to put that.
But that's tough too, because that 36-hour rule doesn't make sense until you really dig in. The day of the offense doesn't count. So if you're arrested at 12:01 a.m., that day does not count towards that 36 hours. Sundays don't count, because that's just the way it is. So that's why some people are arrested and in court the next morning, and some, if you're arrested on a Friday at 12:01, you technically don't have to go to court till Monday by noon.
Right.
So it's a tough system, and again, that's going to be based on what type of offense
Right.
it is when you actually get arrested.
Holidays don't count. So if you're arrested
Right.
the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, you're going to be sitting for a while if they're keeping you in jail.
And also they have another rule in Minnesota called the 48-hour rule, which is, it regards the setting of bail. And I believe that runs from the time of booking, that they have to set a bail within 48 hours. But on the other hand, that can be extended for cause. A judge can extend that. And
Yeah, the 48 hours is with charging you. They have to find probable cause to charge within 48 hours. And that is from the time you're arrested, and that includes Sundays.
yeah.
Yep.
So obviously, from our standpoint as lawyers, clients are constantly calling us trying to get information on when they're in jail, how do they get out. They want to accelerate all of this process, and of course that's what we do. So when you're in jail and you're arrested for a DWI and you're sitting there because you don't have a bail set or you can't get out, that's what you want to do. You want to call us, because we're going to try and accelerate that process for you, and for the most part we're going to be very successful with that.
Yeah, and depending, and like you mentioned, what county it is matters. I mean, I have in my phone right now the on-call judge's number for certain counties.
Right.
Certain counties I don't have that number. They don't have that. They have a different procedure, and again, that's part of the battle with these types of offenses. Is almost all these questions that we have, it depends on where they get arrested. It depends on their history. It depends on which judge is on call. So it's
Right.
pretty random every time.
Right, and most of what we've been talking about is when you're first arrested, the jail time there. But if it's your second DWI in a 10-year period, you're looking at a mandatory minimum 30-day jail sentence. If it's your third in a 10-year period, you're looking at mandatory minimum 90. If it's your fourth in a 10-year period, you might be looking at prison, but at a very minimum, you're looking at a minimum of 180 days in the county jail. So there's definitely real jail time that goes along with these things.
You know, and that's a good point. That leads us right into the next question that we get asked a lot is, will you go to jail for a DWI in Minnesota?
Yep.
And the answer to that really is, it's possible to go to jail for any DWI in Minnesota. Now, does that necessarily mean that that's going to happen? No, but it can happen. Depends on the county, it depends on the judge, it depends on the prosecutors, it depends on the circumstances of the case.
I mean, we've had cases where it's a first offense, but they were going 115 miles an hour. Now, obviously, that's going to be a big difference where the test result and just a fourth degree DWI wasn't the only considering factor. So that's why it's tough when someone calls and asks, will I go to jail? I'm only charged with a fourth degree DWI. We don't know the whole picture yet. And it could be that there are some factors. Did you injure somebody? Just because it's your first one doesn't mean you're not going to jail just because it's your first one. So it's obviously very case-by-case basis.
Very much so, and because a lot of DWI, DUI are drug-related instead of alcohol-related, that could make a huge difference. I mean, how many times have we had a person that's being arrested for a fourth-degree DWI, they have no history, but they happen to have a packet of cocaine in their pocket.
Right.
That's going to change everything, because now you're not just looking at a DWI, you're looking at probably a fifth-degree felony possession of narcotics.
Right.
Right.
But
and that kind of just leads to the next question we get is, do I actually need a lawyer for a DWI? Because most people think they have a test. They have a test result. I'm guilty. Do I need a lawyer here? And that's really not, that's not the end of it. Just because they have a test result doesn't mean you're guilty. And you definitely do need a lawyer, because there are real consequences that can come from this.
Well, if we boil it back down to the Constitution of the United States, Constitution of Minnesota, it creates the presumption of innocence, makes the state, they're the only one, they have the incomplete burden of proof to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that somebody is guilty of an offense. So although the system doesn't treat people like they're innocent right away, because you lose your license and there's jail time after the first arrest, yeah, there's a lot of stuff we can handle. There's constitutional issues. There's a lot of procedure these cops got to follow. And I think that continues to get tighter and tighter every single, both for what drivers can and cannot do, but also for cops. I think procedurally, there's a lot more written down in books and a lot more in the training manuals than there were years and years ago.
Very, very much true. And that question, though, do I need a lawyer? Unequivocally, in 39 years of practicing DWI and having handled over 10,000 cases of DWI, everyone should have a lawyer. No two ways about it. That system, the court system that you're involved in, it's not friendly. It's friendly to lawyers, and that's because it's made up of lawyers. They're the ones who made the laws for the most part, and they've been there for centuries. So if you come into a court and you want to handle it yourself, you're expected to be able to handle that case.
Right.
They're going to treat you as though you're a lawyer trying to handle all of those issues. So the bottom line is that everyone absolutely needs a lawyer, and we're not saying that you're not the smartest person in the world, but the problem is this stuff is complicated, difficult, and in fact many lawyers don't get it right.
Well, if you look at the statutes for murder, it's like 4 pages. For DWIs, it's like 160. There's so much more into these cases when you tie in vehicle forfeiture for some people, the license aspects, possible jail time. There's just a lot to handle. And I think that's what, even if somebody walks in and says, well, I just want to plead guilty, we still can help. We've been with those judges, we know the prosecutors, and we know the system. If you're going to go fix your engine, you're going to go to somebody who knows how to fix an engine. If you're coming to deal with criminal defense, especially in a DWI setting, go to somebody who has the experience in DWI defense.
Yeah. That also brings up a good point too, and that is the relationships that we have as lawyers, given our long-standing practice. And particularly how we focus so specifically on DWI. We have relationships with the prosecutors. We have relationships with the judge. That's not saying that they're going to do anything wrong or anything. They're not. They're going to abide by the law and do what they have to do. But they're much more accessible to us, and they'll listen to us, where probably one of the last things a prosecutor or a judge wants to do is have someone who's unrepresented come up and start asking them for something, especially if they think they're asking them for advice, because they can't give advice.
Right.
And next thing you know, that person pleads or gets convicted, and next thing they're saying is, no, I was coerced into it. I didn't understand what I was doing. And that's the last place a prosecutor or a judge wants to be.
Well, explain the difference. When we worked public defense in law school, I mean, explain the difference. We saw the system
Right.
on
Yeah.
how even clients that are unrepresented, clients with a public defender system, I mean,
Right, and it's not that there's anything wrong with the public defender's office. There's a lot of good attorneys in the public
Very
defender's
good.
office, but they just don't have the same amount of time that private lawyers have. So they can't put as much time into a case. They can't give as much to a case, and they need as many cases as they can to resolve before trial, so that those one or two cases that can make it to trial, they have time to do.
And another thing too with public defenders, and I agree with you, there are some excellent public defenders. In fact, public defenders have worked and do work for this firm that were prior public defenders. But one of the things you want to keep in mind, and this is specific to DWI law, is that public defenders can't do the civil portion of the case. You see, in DWI in Minnesota, there's two parts to a case. You have the criminal, DWI, DUI, whatever level of DWI that is. That's a criminal matter. That's held in a criminal court. You also have the civil component to the case. And that, at a minimum, is the implied consent, assuming there was a test of .08 or more, or they refused. Then you have the civil implied consent portion of the case. There, we have to file petitions and contest the taking of the driving privilege. Now, you also have other civil portions like license plate impoundment, forfeitures, all kinds of things like that. Public defenders cannot do any of that. They're not allowed to do that. You have to have a private lawyer to do that.
And it's not that they're not good enough attorneys to do it. They just flat out aren't allowed to do it because they're only allowed to handle the criminal case.
Yeah. There is just no question, and I'll say it over and over and over. And I know it sounds like it's self-serving because we're the lawyer. We get paid. Bottom line is, no person should ever walk into that court without being represented. In fact, that's why they have public defenders, because they're hoping that they can at least cover that end of it too, that people won't go in unrepresented. So that anyone who has any brains at all, no, you need to get a lawyer. And then the next question is, who are you going to hire for a lawyer? Get yourself an expert. It's the same old thing. If you went to a doctor and that doctor told you that you had cancer and that was a general practitioner, what would you do? The first thing you'd do is find a specialist. You'd find an oncologist that specializes in cancer. And it's the same thing with law. Lawyers that dabble at DWI or any area of law for that fact are just simply, we'll put it this way, highly unlikely that they're going to be as qualified or produce the results that a lawyer who has gained a great deal of expertise in that area. And again, this firm focused on DWI from the very beginning, and when we say we've helped over 10,000 people, to clients, some of them maybe understand that. If you said that same thing to lawyers, 10,000 DWIs is an enormous number of DWIs.
it's probably shooting a little low, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but I like that because 10,000 DWIs resonates with 10,000 lakes in Minnesota. You know, so it's, but the fact of the matter is, you want an expert. You want somebody that deals with it day in and day out, that understands every little nuance, that is not going to miss any opportunity, that has developed systems that they can handle every possibility. And
Well, so and obviously so now we say you need a lawyer, we can help, and one of the big questions is, how can we keep this off my record? And it's exactly this. We need to contest the case, which actually leads to another tied in question. What do you mean contest? I have a test result, like you were saying. The test result is just one piece of evidence. The state has to come in, and there's jury instructions that lay out they have to prove this, this, and this. And the prosecutor has to put evidence forth that connects to each one of those pieces of evidence. Now, that's, again, the test result obviously is a big factor. It controls the license revocation, it controls a number of factors. But clearly, the cases and the clients we've had that the case got dismissed because of a procedural constitutional error would be very good to come in and talk to those clients who are wondering, what do you mean contest? It's not as easy as you drank, then you drove. I mean, very, very infrequent is that actually the defense. We don't raise that you have the wrong person. It's there was something missed. There's a procedure that wasn't followed.
Right.
And you can attack the breath test too.
Right. It's not as simple as, do they have a piece of paper that says you blew into this machine and the machine says 0.08 or more. They have to prove that the testing method that they used to get that number was a reliable testing method. And there's a lot of things wrong with the machine that they use that make it unreliable, I think.
Sure. And to go back to what you initially said, that is so true. If you think about it, the only way to keep a DWI off your record, you have to contest and beat it to begin with.
You have to try.
You have to try, because if you come in after the fact, it's too late. You know, if say you get the DWI in your record, and now you look towards down the line, well, can I try to expunge it? Can I try to do something to get this off my record? All of those options are enormously difficult to do, and it's not consistent whether or not you can expunge something or not expunge it. And even if you can expunge it, can you expunge the entire thing? The Department of Public Safety, can you expunge the criminal courts? There's a lot to it. So the very best way, no question about it, you have to challenge to begin with. And anyone who says that is not correct, they simply don't understand the DWI process.
Right, and you're not just talking about challenging on the criminal side. You know, we're kind of going back to that implied consent
Yes.
challenge that you talked about. Because if you don't file that challenge, you're going to have a DWI on your driving record. And that kind of goes back to the question of, do I need a private lawyer? Yes, you do. If you want to fully challenge everything and try to keep it off your record, you don't really have a choice, because a public defender's not filing that civil implied consent. And if you don't file that, there's really no point in challenging.
You know, Cody, you bring up a really good point there too. How many lawyers have you talked to, or that you just see in court, that don't file the challenge for the implied consent? They either talk their client out of it because it's too much work, it's too hard, the percentage of win is too low, it costs too much money, so they don't do it. In fact, I'm sure the great bulk of people who get DWIs don't challenge the implied consent portion of the case.
Right.
So in this firm, for us, that would just be a cardinal sin. We challenge implied consents every time, unless that client just orders us not to do it, and we're going to push real hard for them to challenge, because we look at it this way. If you're really doing a service for the client, you have to challenge the implied consent. Let's say you didn't challenge the implied consent, you waived the time period or let it go, and you went forward in the DWI criminal portion of the case, and you won in a jury trial, you won. You'd think, wonderful, great, but you didn't challenge the implied consent. Now what happens? You have that revocation on your driver's license, which is essentially the same as a DWI, and certainly from the court's standpoint, they're going to treat it as though you have a prior DWI when it comes to a new charge, and they're enhancing the new charge, and they're penalizing you in the sentence.
Right.
And the Department of Public Safety, same thing. They're going to keep it on your record. That revocation alone is going to be the same as a DWI in effect on your record. So the answer is everyone should challenge an implied consent. And many lawyers won't. And they might disagree with us, and they'll have all kinds of reasons for it. I can't tell you how much we disagree with that.
Right. And to just put it a little differently, you know, you have 60 days to file that implied consent challenge. Say you don't file it, and on day number 61, the judge throws out your criminal case because the cop didn't have a good enough reason to stop you. If your license revocation is 1 year, you're serving the remaining 10 months at that point, and there's nothing you can do about it. So not only does it keep a DWI on your record, it keeps you paying for ignition interlock and serving a license revocation that you shouldn't have to serve.
You know, I want to go back to one of the questions that you brought up, I think, Kyle, and that is, you know, should you hire a lawyer? yeah, it's wonderful to say, hire a lawyer. A lot of people don't hire a lawyer because they can't afford to hire a lawyer. And of course, that's why many people go to public defenders. And if they qualify for the public defender, that's the route they take. But again, if you can hire a private lawyer, you absolutely want to do that. So, what's the first question that comes up? Cost, all right? Lawyers throughout the Twin City area or throughout the state of Minnesota, the cost varies on the lawyer that you're going to hire. Typically, the more experience that lawyer has, the more DWI they do, the more well-known they are. All of those factors make a big difference as to what a lawyer is going to charge you. Now, there's a market upon which people, you're within a range as to what a product can sell for, like a DWI or any product. But the point is that you always want to remember one thing. If a lawyer lowballs somebody and gives them a fee that seems too good to be true, it probably is. You have to remember, what are they really going to do for you? Is this lawyer really going to fight for you? Are they really going to try? Are they going to challenge all of these things? Are they going to go through every bit of the process in detail? Or are they just going to hold your hand and plead you guilty? And unfortunately, the great majority of DWIs, that is probably what happens. Mm-hmm. When they have a lawyer, that lawyer just pleads them guilty. And I'm not faulting lawyers necessarily for doing that, because if that's what the client hired them to do, well, then that's what they should do. They should do what they're told to do by their client. But at the same time, knowing all of that, one has to realize that, as everything in life, you get what you pay for.
Right. And I think one of the other issues with cases like this is, does hiring a lawyer equal we win? No. It's a tough realization that we have to sit down and realize that we can only promise a few things. Hard work, we're going to care a heck of a lot about the client, but that doesn't always equal a result. We're saying keep it off the record. Another one of the big questions is people want to know, can you get it reduced? Well, that's the second choice. We have a plan. We have connections and resources. As a firm of 3, we have 3 heads are better than 1. We have the ability to connect with chemical health providers. We have connections with Smart Start and different companies. We have the ability to help somebody create the best outcome they can. Beating it is obviously the first goal.
Right.
But can we reduce it? Can we get a plea bargain? That's how cases end. Out of all these cases we're talking about, we don't go to trial. Trial doesn't happen. We try, but in terms of statistically, trials are hard to get to.
Right.
We're ready to do it if we need to, but they do end in a plea bargain.
Again, you have to remember, and as you guys have both just said, that most DWI cases will never make it to a trial. There's a lot of reasons for that. The court will put pressure on you to not try the cases because it uses up a lot of resource. And then again, too, if you don't have the facts and case, you probably shouldn't be trying the case. But from our standpoint, if you left it to the lawyer, and if they're good lawyers and they like practicing law and they like trying cases, well, we'd try the case every time. Let's face it, we get paid more money and we're having fun doing it. But from the client's standpoint, the great majority of the time, that will not be what's in the best interest of the client. If that offer is ultimately made on day of trial or whenever, that is a superb, not an okay, but a superb offer, then it's up to the client. And of course, we're going to defer to our client, do what they want us to do. The client is, you're always the boss. We're not the boss, we're the mechanic.
I mean, and one of the early questions is obviously about jail. When we start getting into cases where if you lose at trial, there's a real possibility that you just lost your chance to do an alternative. Jail becomes more realistic. That's too risky sometimes for some clients. So and that's why maybe it's easier just to go to trial for us lawyers, because then we don't have to have that difficult discussion where every client, we come to a spot where you are picking a fork in the road. Right. Are you going to fight this case risking, if we lose, here's what could happen? That's a tough question in most cases. And the higher, one of the big concerns is jail. That's one of the things that the court can impose if you were to lose at a trial. They could take away whatever offer you gave up, mm-hmm. and now you get punished more severely. So it's that's an issue with these cases. And obviously every case goes through that phase.
Right. Now, one of the other things that happens to a lot of people when you get a DWI is you're going to get a bunch of stuff in the mail from attorneys trying to advertise, but it's really a solicitation. And people will come in after having got all those and ask, like, how am I supposed to choose an attorney based on all that? First of all, I'll tell you, you're not going to find us in any of those mailers. But finding an attorney, you have to find the person that's right for you, and you have to find someone you're comfortable with. I think that's the most important thing I find when I'm meeting with clients is I have to make sure that the client is comfortable with me, because if they're not, things aren't going to go real well.
It's not a good fit.
Right.
And I think, and that's probably one of the big differences, that when we're talking to clients, I don't know the inner workings of every other firm, so I can't go into that. But what I can do is tell what makes it different here, what makes it different for our firm representing somebody, and being able to truly, truly care about them as a person, understand that this is not an easy situation for them to go through, and promising to them that you are going to be in communication, calling them, keeping them informed. To me, that's what creates the difference. And I think a lot of clients, when they're choosing DWI lawyers, are trying to assess that. They're gonna assess, can I trust this person? How comfortable I am with them? And I think that's, from my experience in even working at Hellsberg Diamonds, doing anything at Dick's Sporting Goods, I had different retail jobs. That's what it was all about. We're a service industry first. Yeah, we have to be lawyers in a courtroom and filing things and challenging things, but it all boils down to, we have a client who's coming to us with a problem, and we have to make sure that we take care of them. Sure, we have other clients, but each client has to feel like we are there, or that they are our only client, right? They have to have that sort of service, and I feel like that's what's different. That's what makes it different here. If you hire us, plus we have 3 of us.
Right.
Yeah. But it's like anything in life too. You think about what really makes a great attorney. There are many factors that make that up, but certainly one of the things that it would be critical in my mind is what you've been talking about, and that is also, how hard is that attorney going to work for you? How much do they truly care? Are they compassionate? Are you that important to them? And those things they're just critical. And if a lawyer can't think that way, or a law firm doesn't have that as its culture, you don't want to be anywhere near them. And quite frankly, the lawyer shouldn't be practicing law.
Right.
Because if I were to try and look at really anything in life, whether it's lawyering, whether it's whatever job, whatever work you do, probably, at least arguably, the single most important factor is, how hard do you work at it? You want to work smart. That obviously makes a difference. But the lawyer who is willing to just work hard, to bust their butt to help you, and truly care about you, and show you that they care, that's critically important when you're trying to choose a lawyer.
Yep. Now, I think everyone, another one of the questions on the list here is, will I lose my vehicle? We've talked about license, we've talked about jail. Now, not every DWI luckily has to deal with this, but a lot of cases, it's seeming like it's happening more and more. A lot of people are losing their vehicle. Now, that's when you get to a 2nd degree or more. So that could be a multitude of different reasons. It could be your first offense. If you were to drive with a child under the age of 16 and have a test over .16, right, you could get your car taken and seized, and you may not get it back after just your first offense. So I think that's another one of those aspects where having the experience and the expertise to go through not only handling your DWI case and the criminal case, but also being able to handle those collateral issues, and the vehicle forfeiture is another big deal that we handle.
Right. And I mean, the fact is, with the vehicle forfeiture, cops are human, and sometimes they make mistakes, and and prosecutors are too. And sometimes they might, for whatever reason, think that you have a prior DWI and that they get to forfeit your vehicle. And guess what? If you don't have an attorney that knows what they're doing, or you have a public defender, you're probably not going to get that vehicle back, even if they shouldn't have it.
Yeah, and also in forfeiture cases, I mean, there are defenses to it, like innocent owner defenses. You know, you're driving someone else's car. Um, uh, there are several different defenses. The point is, you want an attorney that understands that law inside and out, and you know, and is going to fight hard and not miss any opportunity when it comes to that.
Well, it's funny how these tie back, because now this one talking about the vehicle, when you were talking about how do you keep a DWI off your record, you contest the case and you challenge. What's the best way to fight a forfeiture? You beat the underlying DWI.
Right.
Yes.
So it all starts from the ground up. You have to start by contesting, filing the necessary documents. There are some specific vehicle forfeiture challenges you can make even after conviction, but statistically the percentages go down if you're left with just those. So you want to make sure, even again tying back to that question, it's another reason why certain individuals, sometimes the more they're at risk of losing, it's even more imperative that they have a lawyer, because there's so much more at stake, and one choice of contesting or not contesting could make 3 cases have a very different impact.
You know, and sometimes too, there's different options. I mean, maybe you might, we contest. Typically, you always want to contest first because that shows you're serious. You now, at least you've legally put the brakes on everything. But there are different ways that we approach that. You know, we might talk to prosecutors and try to convince them to give that vehicle back, or to give it to a family member, or to let the person sell it. All of those things have happened many, many times with us. So it's knowing how to do it. Again, those relationships make a huge difference. And not that they're doing anything wrong. They're not. This, you know, everybody wants to conserve resources and do what's right and just. And sometimes prosecutors would like to find a way to give someone a vehicle back where they realize how difficult it's going to be for them and that sort of thing. So.
And I made me think of this. Obviously, you've been doing this for a long time. DWI laws change frequently. You've seen a big change over your career. We've seen a big change over our career. The other big question here is, everyone that we talk to has some friend that told them how it goes, what they should have done, what they could have done differently, what happened to them in their county. But that's probably one of the other big issues that come about. Us lawyers have the ability to, we understand how it works in this county, this city, that city. And we understand when laws change, cases come out weekly with the Court of Appeals. So being up on the changes in the times and in the DWI laws is critical, because it goes fast. Things change fast.
And that can be one of the most frustrating things, is when you have a client who says, well, I had a cousin or a friend or whatever, and this is what happened in their case. Why isn't that happening in mine? You can't answer that question ethically, because I don't know what happened in your friend's case. I don't know what the law was like at the time.
Sure.
I don't know any of that stuff. So that's another tough thing, is you have to realize when you get a DWI, it's your DWI, and it's different than every other DWI.
You know, another thing too, DWIs occur not just here in the Twin Cities. And because we focus so intently on DWI, you know, we go all over the state of Minnesota. Knowing the different counties and having relationships in different counties all over the state. Because, let's face it, after 10,000 DWIs, you've been a lot of places and you've seen a lot of things. So that is, it's important, and that's not saying that lawyers in outstate or some county, other county in Minnesota that's outstate, that they're not good lawyers. I'm sure they are. There's a lot of very good lawyers. But there's also a common sense factor, and that is that if you look at Hennepin County has about 7,000 DWIs alone per year. That means that more DWIs are occurring here, and the lawyers that are here are going to have more access to more DWIs. And of course, this firm, focusing so intently on DWI, we get a lot of it. But when we go up to a county other than the local or other than the metro area, we're very effective in a lot of these counties, even more so than a lot of people that are local, because we do so much of it. We're well known. And of course, we have a very, very strong attitude that we're not just going up there to lay down. We're not just going up wherever the place is to not accomplish something. I mean, every case we start out with, every case, our mission is, can we beat it? Pure and simple. Can we beat it? That's always the first place to start. Can you beat it? You can always shift, you can always turn to negotiation or plea bargain. You know, typically the courts and prosecutors are always going to welcome a plea bargain. The question is, can you beat it? And that's what you want in a lawyer who's doing that and taking advantage of every opportunity to get you that very best result that they can.
And I think one of the strongest negotiation tactics is if your case is strong.
Yes,
so if you have
true.
the evidence, gone through it, and you can tell a prosecutor that not only is your client a nice person, they were cooperative, they've been proactive, and kind of followed through some of those things, but if you can also say, and oh, by the way, here's this issue that is going to be challenged if we can't get something to work out. I mean, that's probably still one of the strongest pieces of negotiation, regardless of who your client is. Good, bad, or ugly, if you have a good legal issue, that helps everything.
Right.
Everything we're talking about, challenging that case is going to be the strongest piece of negotiation.
Right.
You know, you went going back a little bit to the question that you talked about before a little bit, and that is resolving the DWI, the different ways to resolve it. In most DWIs that are first-time DWIs, and the test is on the lower end, typically 08s, 09s, even 10s. The chance of a good lawyer being able to negotiate a settlement in that case, assuming that there's not something particularly egregious with the case, like you didn't run over somebody or kill somebody, the chance of us getting that case reduced to a non-DWI is pretty good for the most part. Now, if you give us some facts in the case, something to go on your side, and that's why you challenge that implied consent first, because by doing that first, you get to use whatever comes out of that implied consent in the criminal portion of the case, and most of it is applicable. And there's no penalty for charging it. You have to remember that's a civil case versus a criminal case. So by doing that, you often uncover issues that we can use to negotiate a settlement in that case, and sometimes get it all the way from being reduced to dismissed. So that's a big factor too.
Right. I think the last question on here is, do you have to tell your employer if you get a DWI? And the answer is not real simple. I mean, it's not like a straight up yes or no from us. It depends on what you do for work. There's some people that have a contract they have to sign for their job. If you sign a contract, there may be something in there requiring you to disclose whether or not you're convicted or even just charged with a crime. Certain people, like nurses, have a professional license. If you have a professional license, you may be required to report it to whatever board, oversees that license. And then there are certain government jobs that require security clearances and background checks, and if you have a job like that, you may be required as well to disclose whether or not you get a DWI. So you have to look into your terms of employment, and you have to look into whether you've signed any contracts or any other documents you have that would outline that.
Or if there's just something, as you said, that would obligate you to tell them. But short of that, short of you being in that situation, I mean, it's a private matter. It's you wouldn't have to tell your friend either if you didn't want to, or your mother, your father, or whoever.
Right.
So
I would say we're big proponents on full disclosure. When asked, tell them. Don't leave anything out. Most of the time, they're just trying to figure out that if they see it themselves and you haven't told them, or you tried to diminish it a little bit, that's where they actually get more upset at people when they get DWIs, when you try to hide it from them.
Mm-hmm.
But again, short of that, if you're not told you need to tell them, then it's more up to you.
Right.
It depends on the relationship you have with your employer. I think that's also critical. And then obviously we haven't talked about if you drive for work.
Right.
It could be a real big deal. But
well,
again,
that would be a big
that'd
deal
be a
if
big
you're
deal.
a professional driver, or you put that company at risk because you're driving and you have a DWI. That could be a whole different story.
I think when we look at all 10 of these questions, the answer for most of them, other than maybe what's the difference between DWI and DUI, is for the rest of them, the answer is it depends. You have to open the door. You have to see what's behind it. You have to try. You have to hire a lawyer, get the evidence, challenge what you can. To me, that's the main answer to all this.
Right.
It really is, because when you think about it with the DWI, I mean, realistically, the person drank, took a drug, and drove. It's not an issue of did they do it. You know, that's really not the issue. And so from that standpoint, as lawyers, we look at it and say, well, right, wrong, good, bad, guilty, innocent, irrelevant. That doesn't have anything to do with it. What we're challenging, what we're looking at, what did the police do? What didn't they do they should have done? What did they do that was wrong? That's what we're going after. We're trying to raise it to an extremely high level to find out where's the hook? How are we going to beat this thing?
Right. And the fact is, you know, like Kyle said, a lot of times the answer is it depends, which can be frustrating for, you know, people when they're coming to meet with you and wanting to see if you're the attorney for them. But truthfully, on a lot of these questions, if you get an answer that is, you know, they say, well, 100% this is the answer, most of the time they're not telling you the truth because they can't tell you at that point what the answer is.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But at the same time, I also look at it, anyone who is charged with a DWI, or really any criminal matter for that fact, you know, you're there, you're now in the soup. Well, there's a door. That door is closed. You can't see on the other side. There's no window. If you don't open the door and you don't look on the other side, how do you know you didn't have the very best case in the world? If that weren't true, why do we win cases where we have multiple DWIs on the individual, or we have a test of 3-6, or we have, you know, all of these horrible factors that you would say, well, it's just not possible. It's always because we're looking at those technical issues. So when you win a DWI, it's almost always extremely technical, and it doesn't have anything to do with did you do it, right, wrong, good, bad, guilty, innocent. Those technical issues mean everything. So if you don't open the door and you don't look, you'll never know.
And how do we handle those? How do we handle the it depends question? You can come in, sit down with us. We will have a free consultation. We won't charge you a thing to come and talk to us. Bring your documents, bring your paperwork. We'll go through what your situation is. We'll talk about what your job looks like and what you need a license for. Bring that all to us, and then we can, if you're like anybody that has these questions, we'll go through them with you specifically, because again, it depends on what your situation is. But we'll sit down, spend the time with you, and figure out what options are best for you.
Yeah, and to that point too, all three of us are very strong on that issue. We are not weak lawyers that are wishy-washy, can't give you the answer. We'll tell you what we think, we'll give you the answer, we'll tell you what to do. We're not going to hold back on that. And when you come in and talk to us, it's all confidential. So you really have nothing to lose, and we're happy to do it. And that's whether you ever hire us or not, doesn't make any difference. We're still happy to do it.
If we can educate you on what it all looks like and give you the best tools to make your decision, that's the goal that we have.
Yeah.